Good morning. Thank you. I'll have to go one more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good, right. There's a teacher in me still, despite the fact that I'm spending my time more administratively lately. But my name is Michael Erickson. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Health, and on behalf of Georgia State University, want to invite you today to the first bike summit in the history of the university, and hopefully not the last. This is a very exciting opportunity to bring together folks who are fundamentally concerned about public health, the health of the community, and things are happening very quickly in Atlanta, and there's a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement, and transportation is at the core of that. Some of you may have known over the last couple of weeks we've had a number of seminars and presentations on different aspects of urban health, and they've really all centered around how to make the urban community a better place to live and more desirable. And this is not something that we've created as an idea, but simply reflects the desire that people have to spend less time in traffic, to live closer to work, to be able to connect to others, to be able to walk to places, to eat, to shop, to visit friends. And so we had Paul Morris from the Beltline a few weeks ago talking about the Beltline, and those of you who, most of you I'm sure are very familiar with it, but in reality it's probably the most innovative urban development activity going on in the world. They've already received some international recognition for what they're doing, and that will have a big bicycling component. We've also had a colleague come down a few weeks ago from Columbia talking about urban health and health disparities. And again, the common theme was people's need to connect together, to be able to have a pleasant environment where they can have friends and neighbors and feel safe and get around. And bicycling is a huge part of that, as well as walkable cities. Just right down here, as you came into Georgia State, you can see the transformation that's occurring in downtown Atlanta. When I started here at Georgia State, there were no dorms. I've been here 10 years, and since that time, there are now 4,000 beds on campus with a desire to have another couple of thousand. And they just opened this place on Cortland that was a private-public partnership that's already full. Georgia State has, I think last I heard, 700 people on the wait list for dorms downtown in Atlanta. This was not only unheard of, but no one would even imagine that there'd be such a desire to live downtown. The streetcar program I've been out of town myself. I don't know if it started testing it during the daytime, but the streetcars will be here, light transit, walkability, bicycling. These are all really core elements to the future of urban settings and urban health. So we're really excited about hosting this summit today to talk about how we can advance bicycling around Georgia State and even beyond to the Atlanta metro area. So with that, I'd just like to get a sense of who's here before we start our formal program. So if you are a faculty or staff employee of Georgia State, if you could just stand and stay standing for a sec. Very good. I can't tell if they're standing or sitting. No, I guess they're standing. So, okay, if you are, stay standing.
Do they deserve a round of applause?
They deserve a round of applause. So if you're a graduate student at Georgia State, please stand. Quite a few.
They deserve a round of applause.
And then if you are an undergraduate at Georgia State, please stand.
Whoa.
There we go. And are you all in one class by any chance? Or
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. The way you all sat together. Okay, great. Thanks for standing, all of you. So we have a great representation of all the stakeholders, the faculty, the staff, our graduate students, undergraduate students, and I have to say that I'm really impressed already with the transformation that's occurred. A few years ago, John Stewart helped with a campaign to build a bike rack, get a bike rack designed and established on Gilmer Street outside the student union area. And more often than not, it wasn't filled. And so I look at bike racks all the time, and I just noticed the bike racks at Georgia State are getting filled. And who would have thought? I mean, it really was not something that seemed likely given the traffic in downtown and the nature of it. But it actually is transforming. It's transforming in a very dramatic way. So hopefully today we'll continue to advance that effort of transformation, to be thinking about light rail, thinking about walkability, and particularly thinking about bikeability, so that we can have a more pleasant and friendly and green environment in which we work and play. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John Stewart. John is the director of our Partnership for Urban Health Research and has a personal passion and a bad knee from biking himself. I'm sure he'll tell you the story. But John, thank you for organizing this, and have a great day.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Well, I tell you, this is really energizing to see a room full of people who are excited about bicycling, a room full of bicycles, and people who bicycled here today. Let me see how many people rode their bicycle to campus today. Can you see show of hands? Outstanding, look at that. A third maybe? That's pretty good. Well, thank you very much for your commitment to coming out on a chilly morning to do that. I've just got a few things about the conference itself, and then I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. First of all, I want to thank our supporters for the meeting today. The School of Public Health, the Office of Sustainability at Georgia State, the College of Law and their Center for Comparative Study of Metro Growth. We have student organizations who've been active in this, Panther Bikes, as well as the Sustainable Energy Tribe. Thank you very much. And the Department of Recreation Services, the Police Department at GSU, and Facility Management have all been instrumental in making this a success. If you notice, there's a bicycle rack outside of 25 Park Place today, and that was because of sustainability and facility management's efforts to get one before our event today. I have to also give a special thanks to our planning committee, and I won't name all of them, but Sunday, Kayla, Anna, Kat, Sarah, Mike, thank you very much for all your support. Mike and Michael have been great to work with. And I know they will be glad to help you today to get through the meeting as well. We have several exhibitors, some over here, some up here, some in the room next door, and we hope that you have a chance to interact with the people who came to talk to you about their programs, like the Beltline, like Touch the Earth, and others today. So we hope to give you an interactive opportunity during lunch hour and during the breaks to visit those exhibitors. Finally, I want to tell you just before I introduce Professor Pucher how this came about. Dr. Michael Black sent out an email to all faculty last winter saying, please consider attending a workshop for 2 days in early January on teaching sustainability in your curriculum. And I saw that and I said, that's pretty cool, I'm going to sign up for it. But who else would possibly do that at Georgia State? Really? Professors are going to come to a 2-day workshop to talk about sustainability in the curriculum? So the workshop occurred. I was amazed. Over 40 faculty participated in that workshop out at our recreation center at Indian Creek. Amazing 2 days. I talked to a colleague there, Karen Johnston, who said, why don't we organize a bicycling meeting for later in the year? So Karen and I began to work on this event, and here we are today. So it's really gratifying to see all of you who wanted to come out for that event. You also know that we did a survey here at Georgia State recently of bicycling and bicycling behaviors. I'm going to have some information later in the day about the details of that survey. Frankly, we have not analyzed all the data, but I'll give you one tidbit from the data. Most people at Georgia State, when asked whether they're bicyclists or not, that Georgia State would be a better place if more people bicycled to campus. They see that as a value. Most people say that Georgia State would be a better place. So that's what today is all about. Making Georgia State a better place, making Atlanta a better place, making your lives better through bicycling. So, without further ado, I'm going to briefly introduce our speaker, who we are so fortunate to have today. We've been exchanging emails and occasional phone calls over the last few months. The man is a delightful person to interact with. He's so enthusiastic about bicycling and enthusiastic about coming down here. He took time out of his personal schedule, which is quite busy and quite demanding right now, to come to Georgia State. Professor Pucher, I personally appreciate that. Thank you. So Professor John Pucher is a professor at Rutgers University and has been there, if my math is right, for about 35 years. And he's preparing to retire from Rutgers University and come down and join all of us in the South. He is a professor that deals with economics, transportation systems, transportation research, and over the last 15 years, he's focused on opportunities for cycling and walking, primarily in cities. And he studied this not only in the U.S., but all around the world. How do cities make their lives better for those people by walking and bicycling in the cities? And I think the other way around. How does bicycling and walking make the cities better places? Professor Pucher has written a book, okay? City cycling is one of the most successful and widespread examples, very well respected publication on cycling. And I've read most of it, and it's really a delight to read and very informative book. So Professor Pucher, I'm going to come up, turn it over to you. Please come up, and let's welcome Professor John Pucher to Georgia State.
Thank you very much. Do I need to turn these things on?
Yes. So,
Are they automatically on? Oh, I need the pointer. Sorry. I'm very forgetful. I'm a typical professor.
Should I turn it up for you?
Is it on? I'm going to get electrocuted for sure. Okay. Well, thanks to all of you for coming out so early on a Sunday, Friday morning. I would never come out this early for anything. So thank you very, very, very much. I may come from New Jersey. It's 73 semesters I've been at Rutgers, 36 and a half years. But I'm not a Yankee. I actually grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I am going to be retiring. I've already bought a house down in Raleigh, so I will be returning to the South. And so I have a real vested interest in promoting walking and cycling here in the Southeast, because I'm going to be living here, and I would like to improve walking and cycling conditions for everyone here in the Southeast. But I would like to just give you some information, some background on some possibilities on how to increase the safety, the convenience of the feasibility of cycling on an everyday basis, just getting around from point A to point B, whether it's for shopping or visiting friends or going to church or whatever. So anyway, this is the point of this, sort of what lessons can we learn from other places in the world that have been in fact successful in increasing cycling and making it safer at the same time. Uh-oh. There we go. Oop, uh-oh, whatever I did, it was the wrong thing. Oh, I know, I pushed the wrong thing. I pushed the wrong button. There's too many buttons. I got it. Okay, now I've got it. I think it takes me a while, but. Well, why would we want to promote cycling? Well, it's economical, it's very cheap. I mean, you don't have to buy a $5,000 carbon fiber bike. You can get a bike for $300, $500, whatever. So it's cheap for the individual. It's also cheap from the point of view of the government. It doesn't cost that much to put in a bike lane or bike racks, as I'll show you later. Turns out it's very good for business. I may show you some statistics later, but every study that has ever been done shows that providing bicycling facilities actually increases property values, increases retail sales, and so it's good for business as well as for individuals. Obviously, there's no pollution from cycling. Energy efficient, not only is it energy efficient, in fact, it's about 3 times more energy efficient than walking. That's why I like cycling so much. But anyway, it burns up those calories. I had to give a talk at the City Council of Toronto, and everyone went around and said, "Why do you cycle?" And one of the council people said, "He cycles because it means he can eat more cookies." Okay. So it burns up calories. It's energy efficient. It's healthy. I'll get into this a little bit later, but I mean, every study shows that the health benefits of walking and cycling far offset the whatever traffic dangers there are of cycling. So it's really on net a very healthy thing to do. And it's fun. I mean, I don't think I have to sort of go on to too much right here. By the way, we talk about this word sustainability. And technically, the World Bank has 3 different aspects of sustainability: social sustainability, economic sustainability or financial sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And it turns out that cycling and walking together are the most sustainable modes of transportation on every single one of those categories. And they're sort of reflected in these advantages here. Well, there's so many advantages to cycling, it's actually divine. Okay, I spent 2.5 years living in Münster, Germany, and this is indeed the way the nuns got around in Münster, Germany, and the bishop got around by bike too. And then one of my colleagues in Memphis said there was this blessing of bikes at his church there in Memphis. And I have a blessed bike, and Lord knows I need a blessed bike cycling in New Jersey, let me tell you. I mean, I'm really very happy. Well, this is a school of public health, and so one of the really important reasons that you want to get people on bikes and walking is because it increases your physical activity on a normal, everyday basis. You don't really have to think about it. You just sort of, you have to go shopping, you have to come to class, you want to visit some friends, you want to go to the movies, whatever it is. You're going to be riding the bike, and you're not going to be thinking about, I'm doing this for exercise, but you're going to get the exercise. Well, that's really important, because if you look at this map, this is from the CDC, and it's showing you that the South in general has a lot of people who do not get enough physical activity. So what you see here, the dark part, is the percentage of people who have insufficient levels of physical activity. And that, not surprisingly, is correlated with levels of obesity, which are also concentrated in the South, also correlated with levels of diabetes, also concentrated in the South. Also concentrated in the South is heart disease. We've got some problems here. And that seems to be one of the big problems. That is, we are very, very car-oriented. We use the cars to go everywhere, even for short trips. And I say we because in North Carolina, I have a lot of experience in North Carolina, and it's not that different from Georgia. And we are very, very car-oriented, which means we're not getting that natural physical activity we would get if we were walking or biking to various destinations. Another way to look at this, we had a study actually comparing cycling in Canada and the United States, and we were shocked to find that cycling levels in Canada are about 2 to 3 times higher than they are in the United States. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. Isn't it cold up there? But as it turns out, cities in Canada are much more compact, and trip distances are shorter. That actually is what explains most of the difference between Canada and the United States. But if you look at the United States, what you'll also see is one of the lowest level of cycling really is here in the Southeast. We are growing. I mean, there's big increases in cycling in a lot of cities here in the Southeast, but we're starting at a fairly low level compared to the rest of the country. But as I say, that's changing fast, fortunately. And when I get down here, it'll change even faster. Well, just as the Southeast has a relatively low level of cycling, turns out that the United States overall has a very low level of cycling compared to the rest of, I'll say, the developed world. That's not quite the right word to use, but anyway, high-income countries. If we compare ourselves, Sweden, Finland, Germany, Denmark, Norway, I mean, these are also very, very high-income countries, very high standards of living, and yet, as you can see, they have 10, 20, whatever times as much cycling as we have. I guess the Netherlands has 50 times more cycling. But if you look at those European countries to the right hand in particular, you'll see, I mean, these are all very high income countries, high standards of living, and they're riding their bikes not because they're poor, not because they don't have a car, because most of these countries have practically universal car ownership. They're riding it because the bicycling is convenient and it's faster than getting around by car. So, and fun as well, and it's less expensive. But the expense isn't really the main issue. If there have been studies done, for example, in the Netherlands, in Germany, and they ask, what's the #1 reason you cycle? Because it's the most convenient and it gets me faster where I want to go. And I think that's one of the crucial things in promoting cycling, making it fast and convenient. We already know it's going to be cheap. We have a tremendous potential for increasing cycling. I mean, forget all those previous slides for a second, which are sort of depressing. Look at it positively. If you look at trips in the United States, and this is the latest National Travel Survey, shows that over a quarter of all of our trips are a mile or shorter, and 41% are 2 miles or shorter. I mean, making a bike trip that's 2 miles is like nothing. I mean, you inhale a few times and you've covered 2 miles. Walking a mile is, okay, for some people difficult, but most people can walk a mile. So these are certainly bikeable distances. There's no question about that. So we have a huge potential for increasing the percentage of our trips by bike. I mean, 27% of our trips are a mile or shorter. That's really short. The problem is we have no cycling facilities in many cases. I know this is the case in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I mean, getting from point A to point B, even if it's half a mile away, there's an arterial, it's too busy, there's no cycling facilities and so forth. So the point is, there's a lot of potential. We could vastly increase the amount of bicycling we have in the United States. I'll be careful, I just touched the right button. One other thing that makes the United States a little bit weird when it comes to the rest of the world, and that is women don't bicycle nearly as much in the United States as they do, for example, in Western Europe. If you look at Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, there's really no gender gap. You have as many women cycling as you have men. And in fact, if you look at Denmark and the Netherlands, there's more women cycling than there are men. 55, 56% of all bike trips in the Netherlands and in Denmark are by women. So the notion that somehow women are less able to bicycle is just a bunch of baloney. It's just not true. You can see that the Germans, the Danes, and the Dutch women cycle actually even more than the men, whereas here in the United States, only about a quarter of our bike trips are by women. So there's something wrong. We're doing something wrong here in the United States, as well as in the UK and Canada, and Australia is even worse. It's 18%. And I think that what we're doing wrong is we don't make bicycling safe and convenient enough. We don't have the sorts of facilities that women say they want in order to bike, which I'll get into a little bit later. But it certainly is not the case that women, for whatever reason, can't bicycle as well as men. That's just not true, because you can see what happens in Western Europe. And in fact, this is a very typical picture. Now, wouldn't this be nice to have this be what you would see in Atlanta every day? I mean, that's a really nice picture. I know people from CDC don't like the fact they're not wearing helmets, but that's just the way it looks. I mean, that's just the way. Actually, Susan Handy, who's a colleague of mine at UC Davis, took this picture, and I mean, no one was wearing a helmet at all. I mean, it looked very comfortable. There's no lycra, or what do you call that stuff that people wear? What? Yeah, anyway, there's no carbon fiber bikes or any special clothing. It's an everyday normal thing to do. I say 55% of all bike trips in Denmark are by women. And as it turned out, 3 of my colleagues, Susan Handy, Jennifer Dill, and Jan Gerard, who's in Melbourne, did a study specifically on women in cycling. And what they found, they did a lot more than just this, but they were comparing levels of cycling in different cities and the percentage of bike trips in those cities that were by women. And what they found was The higher the percentage of bike trips that were by women, the higher the overall mode share of bikes. And conversely, the higher the overall mode share by bikes, the higher the percentage of bike trips by women. So there was this correlation that is, and they sort of draw the conclusion, men should listen to women, ask them what they want, and give them what they want. And if you do that, you'll get more women on bikes, and by getting more women on bikes, you're going to have a tremendous boom in bicycling. That's not exactly the way they concluded the chapter, but it was something like that. It was saying it's absolutely crucial. If you want, in fact, Jan came up, she herself said she considers women an indicator species. If you want to see whether or not cycling policy is successful, just count the percentage of bicyclists who are women, and that will tell you whether or not you're successful. And once you're 50-50, you're doing okay. So anyway, if you believe that's true, I'll let you go for that. Now the other thing that's very important to me, because I'm getting older, but you're getting older too. You young folks might think you're really young, but you're getting older at the rate of one day at a time. So you're going to have to think about this issue later too, but aging of our populations is a really important factor in the United States, in Canada. Japan, I think, has the most percentage that's over 85 years old, but in almost every developed country, we have an increasing percentage of our population that's over 65, 75, 85. In fact, I was just reading, I think it was 2 days ago in the New York Times, that the fastest increasing segment of our population is the segment over 85 years old. Well, as we get older, don't we want to maintain mobility, have that physical activity, the independence, and not have to rely on van services or friends or neighbors or family to drive us around? Well, as it turns out, unlike what many Americans would assume, as you get older, you can still bike and walk. And in fact, if you look at the figures here for Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, what you see is as the Germans, the Danes, and the Dutch get older, they make a higher and higher percentage, slightly higher percentage of their trips by walking and biking. That is giving them tremendous physical activity. It's making them healthier. And by the way, there's the psychological, so the mental health benefits of cycling as well, that it generates these serotonins, makes you feel better, you can think more clearly, and so forth. And so if you find someone who's in a bad mood, they're probably not bicycling. But I mean, really, there have been studies done, and they really show that this physical activity of walking and cycling makes people feel better. So I mean, not only is it physically good for you, it's also mentally good for you. But the good news is, for me, I know that it is possible. As I get older, I'm going to still be able to walk, I'm going to still be able to bike. And I would just like to point out one figure, and that is, so you've got the Netherlands, in the age group 70 to 74, 15% of all of their trips are by bike. That's between 70 and 74 years old, 15% of the trips by bike. And it's not even 0.5% in the United States over 65. So again, you can get older and still bike. And that's hopeful news, as I say, to me. So I think cycling should be made possible for all ages. I mean, there'll be some age when you're too young. I mean, obviously a baby's not going to bike. Although it can ride on the back of a bike. And if you're really, really old, I mean, there's going to be certain kinds of mobility impairments that are going to prevent you from bike. But for the most part, as we get older, we can continue to walk and bike. And I think it's really important, both to our physical and to our mental health. I think one of our goals is to make cycling safe and convenient for everybody. And not just to make it safer, to make it feel safer. Because what a lot of studies have shown is sometimes cycling is a lot safer than people think it is. And it's important not only to increase cycling safety, but to also give people the feeling of being safe and comfortable as they're cycling on whatever cycling facilities you provide. And so it's important to provide the facilities that make people feel comfortable while they're cycling, as well as actually making cycling safer. Now, if you look at what's happened, say, in Europe, they managed, the next slide will show that this is true, they have made cycling very, very, very safe. What we did is we looked at the national travel surveys of each of these countries, and then also looked at the National Bureau of Statistics for each of the countries on fatalities, traffic fatalities, and we calculated traffic injuries and fatalities per kilometer traveled, like it was 10 per 10 million kilometers traveled and per 100 million kilometers walked. And what you see here is the Netherlands, Denmark have cycling and walking safety levels that are about 10 times safer than in the United States. Let's look at it in the positive way, not that it's so dangerous in the United States, but how safe the Netherlands and Denmark and Germany were able to make cycling. In the next slide, I wonder if this worked. Oh, but they both work. It wasn't always that way. I think that maybe the best news that you can get out of this presentation is Europe has not always been a paradise for walking and cycling. If you go back to the 1950s, 1960s, they were following the role model of the United States. They were trying to make their cities as auto-friendly as possible. Parking lots everywhere, building expressways, destroying neighborhoods and so forth. And right about the beginning of the 1970s, middle 1970s, there was sort of like a transportation revolt throughout Northwestern Europe at least. And cities and countries decided that this is ruining our cities. It's just, they were having a fourfold, fivefold increase in traffic fatalities. There was a congestion problem, there was a pollution problem, the cities were dying out. Sound familiar? Sort of like what happened here in the United States a little bit later, but at any rate, what they decided by the 1970s this has got to stop. And they completely reversed their policies. Well, one of the results, and I'll show you the policies in a second, is they dramatically reduced, this is the pointer. I can actually point. You can see that these are the European countries, and here's Canada, by the way, which did a very good job as well. They tremendously reduced the percentage, and this is using 100 as the base year for 1975. So everything is relative whatever level they had in 1975. But you can see in all of these other countries, they had a 60 to 80% reduction in cyclist fatalities. In the United States, we've had a slight reduction. Maybe that's something like, I don't know, 20% reduction or something like that. It goes up and down and up and down. But it certainly hasn't been nearly as dramatic as the reduction in cyclist fatalities in these other countries. So there's a lot we could do that we haven't done yet. And this is this reversal in car policies that I was telling you about before, and I'll just show you some examples of this. This, they dramatize how big of a shift this was in their policy. So in the 1960s, this was a bridge in Freiburg, Germany, which is a town of about 200,000 people in southwest Germany. It's the capital of Black Forest. This is what they did to it. They just took the cars off and gave it to bicyclists. They had a huge tripling in the level of cycling in Freiburg, a big increase in cycling. But this is just one of the things they did. But this is just to show you sort of dramatically with an illustration of this shift in policy. Before, the bridge was for cars, now it's for bikes. This is a very typical street. It's exactly the same street, believe it or not, before and after. It's Klauderstrasse, also in Freiburg. And it's what they did is they traffic calmed almost all of their residential streets. And traffic calming has different forms, but basically it's reducing the speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour, which is 19 miles an hour. Well, it's just approximate, say, 20 miles an hour. So they turn almost all of their residential streets into 20-mile-an-hour zones. But on top of that, you can never trust a motorist. So they actually create infrastructure changes to the street. As you can see what they did, it's exactly the same street, believe it or not. But they narrowed the street. They put in street furniture, so there's benches there, there's bike parking, there's trees, you have human scale lighting. I don't think anyone here would disagree that the picture on the right is a lot more attractive than the picture on the left. I wouldn't mind living in that street to the right, but I wouldn't want to live in that street to the left. In fact, the street to the left has cars parked on the sidewalk. So, it really was, again, I'm just dramatizing the shift in policy. It was not always the case that Europe was such a paradise for walking and for cycling. Now, in the 1950s, in the 1960s, there was a huge decline in cycling in Northwestern Europe, and Europe in general, in the UK and France and everywhere. Then they shifted these policies, and this just shows you the impact of how important public policies are. And when I say public policies, and we'll get to them later, providing the cycling infrastructure, building cycle tracks, building protected bike lanes, providing bike parking and so forth, better bike education in the schools. But look at Nuremberg. This is not a small city. It's like maybe 1 million people, something like that. They tripled from 1976 to 2012. They tripled the bike share of trips from 4 to 12. Berlin is now over 14%, by the way, but they doubled. Again, this is the biggest German city. These aren't small cities. Doubled it from 7% to 14%. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see, I mean, Munich more than doubled. In fact, now they're at 17% in Munich. And so what I'm showing here is in that yellow bar, I do have a pointer, okay? In the yellow bars, that's before the policy shift. The blue bar is after the policy shift. We want to get on the blue bar here in Atlanta. So we're over here somewhere and we're saying, we want to find out, what do they do in those cities to double, triple, quadruple levels of cycling? I'll also say something else. Everyone's heard about Copenhagen and Amsterdam. Oh, you know, the bicycling paradises of the world and so forth and so on. And they did have very high levels of cycling. But look at what they did over the 70s, 80s, 90s, and continuing. They have nonstop been improving their facilities, and as a result, even there, where you had a lot of cycling, 25%, it went up to 37% or 38%. So all of these cities that we think in Europe as being, such great cycling cities were not always that way. And the way they made them good cycling cities is through public policies. There are also a number of cities that did not have a tradition of cycling. The previous cities used to, before the 1950s, 1960s, they had maybe half of their trips by cycling. And then all of a sudden there was this huge plummeting. Well, these cities, so in Spain and France, in Bogota, Colombia, there was really no tradition of daily utilitarian cycling. And then, I guess almost in every case, a mayor came to power who was a big proponent of cycling. They built a lot of cycle tracks, these protected bikeways. They had bike sharing programs, for example, Velib in Paris. They have a bike sharing program in Barcelona. In London, it's Barclay Bikes and so forth. But they build more bike lanes, more cycle tracks, have bike sharing programs, and you can see what happened. I mean, here, a doubling, tripling, quadrupling, I guess that's a quadrupling. And in Seville, it was actually more than a 10-fold increase. And this is what they did in Seville. And you can do it here in Atlanta. I mean, I'm sure Atlanta is bigger than Seville. Again, they had no tradition of cycling. We were going from less than 1% of trips by bike all the way up to almost 10% of trips by bike. So they built 164 kilometers of these kinds of protected cycle tracks. And as a result, they had this 10-fold increase in cycling, an 80% reduction in the cycling injury rate, and a big increase in cycling by women, by children, and by seniors. So, I mean, if you want to, I guess one of the answers to the question as to what should you do if you want to promote more cycling, and especially get more women, seniors, and children on bikes, is to provide this sort of protected facility, which doesn't, it gives both the sense of more safety, but it also is safer, as several studies have now shown. But that's a pretty nice looking facility. And they built 164 kilometers of that in 8 years. Well, 8 years. We have had a boom in cycling in many American cities. So it's not just Europe that's doing a good job. And by the way, I think a lot of cities here in the Southeast doing a very good job, and Atlanta is one of them. But if you look here at these sort of the biggest cities, in the South, New Orleans is the one that comes out on top, 2.4%. But the point in this table is simply if you compare 1990 with 2011. So the red bars are the more recent ones. Actually, the latest one we could take 2013, but we were comparing in this graph Canada and the United States. And long story short, but the latest travel survey that's available in Canada is for 2005, I think it is, or nine, whatever. Anyway, the point here is that you have this big, big increase in cycling in these cities as a result of more bike lanes being built and so forth. So we've been making some progress here in the United States as well. And in the South. Don't let anyone sell the South short, because if you look at the period between 1990 to 2009, and this is for ultra purposes, It comes from the National Household Travel Survey, which is the only travel survey for all trip purposes available in the United States. And it comes out once every 5 or 6 years, something like that. But you can see here a steady increase in cycling in the South from about 600 million trips per year over to 1.3 billion trips per year. So that's like anyway, I'm not sure what the percentage is, but it's a big, big, big increase. Now, when it comes to cycling to work, now the previous one was for all trip purposes. That includes recreational trips. If you look just at cycling to work, or commuting as it's called, and that's what the census the census only looks at commuting trips, and the American Community Survey only looks at commuting trips to work. So it's just a portion of the cycling trips. But if you look at those, and that's available on an annual basis, you can see here that there was not much difference between 1990 and 2000, but then a big, big jump between 2000 and 2013. And if you look at individual cities, you'll see Atlanta does very, very well here. A 163% increase in the number of daily bike commuters between 2000 and 2013. Memphis has the biggest increase. I mean, wow. I was talking to the guy who's the ped bike coordinator there. It's just amazing what they've done with very little in the way of money. 255% increase in the number of daily bike commuters, 90% increase in Raleigh, 161. Anyway, big increases. And I could have taken other cities across the South as well. But the point is that a lot of cities across the South are building bicycle facilities, they're putting in bike parking, they're putting in bike corrals, they're doing a lot to promote cycling. They have a lot of recreational trails as well, and they're getting a lot more cycling. Now, this is specifically commuting to work, but I can tell you, I think that this understates total cycling in the South, because what I've observed is most cycling in the South is recreational cycling, which is good too. I'm not at all against recreational cycling. That's why you have mixed-use paths and so forth. But I think that just looking at the ACS or the commuter cycling understates the total level of cycling. Well, what are all these public policies? I better really get going here. So what are the answers to these questions? What do we do? I'm not going to go through the whole list. I'll just show you the list. Well, first you want to provide better facilities. Almost every European city has some sort of an extensive, actually, auto-free pedestrian zone. It's not just one street. It's an interlocking network of car-free streets which make it ideal for cycling and for walking. This one happens to be the one in Münster, Germany, where I was living. In the United States, our biggest car-free zones, not for every university, but for many universities, is the campus. I mean, if you go, and some campuses are more car-free than others. I mean, you go to Berkeley or UC Davis or UNC Chapel Hill, and most of the campus is in fact car-free, which makes it an ideal environment for walking and for cycling. This happens to be Davis, California, which has the highest level of cycling in the United States. So it's a little bit misleading. I mean, there is a lot of cycling, and incredibly, you'd think, I mean, looking at this arrangement, there'd be a lot of conflicts between the pedestrians and the cyclists. It's one of the safest walking, cycling cities and universities in the entire United States. So somehow they keep out the cars, and the pedestrians and the cyclists seem to be able to manage. This is another car-free campus, UC Santa Barbara. Really nice cycling facilities there. I mean, now do those students look stressed out? I don't think so. I think they're having fun going from one class to another. They probably enjoyed that more than their classes. But I've been there like 3 times now. Really, really excellent bicycling facilities there. But they have so much bicycling and so much walking, they actually find that they, in that case, need to divide the cyclists from the pedestrians to avoid possible conflict. So if you have a really, really heavy levels of walking and heavy levels of cycling, you need to do something to separate the two. This is again Santa Barbara, and it's just an example of the kinds of facilities. And again, they're smiling. So you get people on bikes and they'll be more alert when they go to class. The Dutch, who are sort of famous throughout the world for having they probably do have actually the best bicycle facilities anywhere in the world, the best engineered. And as you can see, one of the things that they do is they make that whenever they can do it, they devote the space to the bicyclists. And as a result of this, you can have people cycling 2 abreast or even 3 abreast. And that means that cycling becomes a social event as well. Instead of having just a single, I mean, many of our bike lanes here in the United States are so narrow, that you're going down the thing single file. And it's sort of hard to have a conversation with someone in front of you or back of you. If the bike lane is wide enough, you can actually have conversations with the person next to you. So, but anyway, it's completely separated from motor vehicle traffic, so it's safe, it feels safe, it is safe. As you saw on the previous slide, the Dutch have a per kilometer and per trip fatality rate for cycling that's 1/10 of that in the United States. And again, I wear a helmet when I'm cycling because in New Jersey you do. But cycling, the feel of cycling, the image of cycling is so safe in the Netherlands that no one wears a helmet. And again, I'm not against helmets, but just a note, that's just how safe they feel, that even kids don't wear the helmets. And I know the CDC would hate me for even showing this, but that's just the way it is. Montreal up in Quebec has been the leader in providing these physically separated, protected cycle tracks. They provided the first ones, and they have the biggest network. They have 120 kilometers, so I get to 80 miles of cycle tracks as of 2014. And you can see here how the separation is. You have this concrete barrier, plus you have bollards. And so it's a very safe environment indeed. And I remember before they put this in, it's like you had to ride on the sidewalk going down here, and it was very steep. It was sort of scary, but it was a real improvement in terms of the design. And they also use, one of the themes of this is unifying Georgia State with the city of Atlanta, but also it's sort of a nice to even broaden that notion, unifying the various universities here in Atlanta with each other and with the city of Atlanta. And that's what they do with these cycle tracks in Montreal. They are, in fact, uniting a number of the different universities in Montreal with the downtown areas, various shopping areas, and so forth. So it's a win-win situation. The different universities get to mix and mingle with each other, and students get to take courses at all the other universities. They can take advantage of all the downtown opportunities, live in some interesting community. And so having this sort of a connected system, a network of protected cycle tracks really makes a difference. And some people argue that cycle tracks become dangerous at intersections, but the way they do it in the Netherlands and also here in Montreal is so well done. And that we're using the right traffic signals, the right road markings, and so forth, you can really, really, really make it very safe indeed, even at intersections. One of the first cities, I think New York was, in fact, the first city in the United States to build a cycle track. I think the first one was on 9th Avenue going south, which is the one shown here. They currently have over 30 miles of cycle tracks. They've been a boom, a real success. You can see several important features here. One, you get a special bike signal that tells you when you can go, a no left turn signal for cars, and you can see really lots of physical separation here between the cyclists and the moving motor vehicle traffic. And just to show you what New York City did, and again, I'm not a huge fan of New York, but 450 miles of new bike lanes and paths since the year 2000. I mean, that's a big investment, including the 30 miles of cycle tracks. They got, as a result, a 6-fold increase in the number of bike trips, a 78% decrease in cyclist injury rates, and get this, an 85% increase in retail sales. I mean, like there's only positives. Really, really good. I was up in Toronto 5 weeks ago to give a talk. And so I got a number of photographs of what was going on there. And they're doing something sort of similar to what's going on here in Atlanta. They're building a lot of sort of buffered bike lanes with the bollards in them. And I mean, some people would designate this as a cycle track. It's not quite as separated as some of those examples we saw earlier, such as in Montreal. But it's still, it provides at least a little barrier. I mean, if I were that woman on the bike, I feel a little bit safer with this huge truck next to me. I'm not sure if it's an 18-wheeler, but it's a big truck anyway. At least she has this barrier here, and then there's bollards along here. I would personally prefer a concrete barrier, but anyway, this is very similar to what you've got here in Atlanta. I mean, it's almost a different color of the bollards and a slightly different kind of a barrier, but the same sort of a concept. It's less expensive than the approach that I showed that was used in New York City and less expensive than the one chosen in Montreal. So, I mean, you have a budget and you do what you can do given the available money that you've got. You also have buffered bike lanes. This one's on West Paces Ferry Road. And so again, it doesn't give you a physical barrier, but at least it gives you that additional separation. And in this particular case, it's pretty wide physical separation. It's wider than the one we saw in Toronto, in fact. And this is one of the, I think, the nicest cycle track I've ever been on is this one here in Vancouver. We had a study tour up there 2 years ago. And I mean to tell you, it's beautiful, beautiful. I mean, it was so beautiful. They had lavender planted here in these planters. And I became the slowest cyclist in the world because I kept stopping to smell the lavender. I mean, first of all, there's no car that's going to get over that barrier. I mean, you are going to feel very safe indeed. It's a very beautiful barrier. The other thing you can't see because of the angle of this picture is to the left-hand side. At the same time, they improved the bicycling environment. And really, it's very nice. And at the intersections, they've done it perfectly. I mean, just the right kinds of markings, the right kinds of lights. I mean, they are doing an excellent job there. And the whole point of the slide, by the way, though, is that here, before they put in this cycle track, this was the situation of the cyclists. There was actually a bike lane there. But as you can see, the cars did not respect it. It really was a bike lane, totally ignored by the cars. And so you have these daredevil cyclists, well, I shouldn't say daredevil, but anyway, certain cyclists who say, okay, you know, I'll put up with it. I don't mind weaving my way through the cars. But when they put in this cycle track, it's exactly the same road, Hortonby Street. They increased the level of cycling, decreased the cycling injury rate, increased the number of women cycling, senior cycling, and children cycling. So again, they achieved that goal. And the comment that I was going to make before is, I mean, I think we have to consider walking too. Walking is a really important source of physical activity, important source for everyone to get around. And to the left of this, you can't see it. I mean, forget that picture for a moment. But to the left of this, there's a magnificent pedestrian promenade. And so at the same time, they narrowed the street. They put in this really nice barrier between the cars and this cycle track and made this beautiful pedestrian promenade. I mean, it was so beautiful, it was a debate which I was going to do. Am I going to bike on the bike lane or am I going to walk on the promenade? They're both that nice. A friend of mine, Fiona Campbell, is the ped bike coordinator of Sydney, Australia, which is a little bit like Atlanta in some ways, but at any rate, it's certainly down under. And Fiona, when she became bike coordinator for the city of Atlanta, she really felt what was needed in Sydney Sydney, not Atlanta. Sydney, she decided she wanted to put in these cycle tracks, which she did. Now, you've got to admit, that is a nice-looking cycle track. I mean, nice plantings here, complete physical separation from the motor vehicle traffic. They had an independent consultant do a study of this, and they found that the economic benefits, purely just the economic benefits, offset the economic costs by a ratio of 3 to 1. And on top of that, they doubled the level of cycling as a result of installing the cycle track. Here's a cycle track in St. Petersburg, Florida. They tremendously increased the number of seniors on bikes as a result of putting in this cycle track. Got a cycle track here or up there in Washington, D.C. And I talked to the head of their pedestrian program for DOT in Washington, and they currently have 5 cycle tracks and 6 miles in total. So anyway, so it's certainly a symbol of the United States. They're building a cycle track. But not something you would expect. At the headquarters of Walmart in Arkansas, even Walmart is building cycle tracks. I mean, if Walmart, and I've heard that at the Coca-Cola campus somewhere here in Atlanta, they're going to build a cycle track on there. So, I mean, if Coca-Cola and Walmart are doing it, you know, we can do it too. Here's a cycle track on the University of Oklahoma campus. Again, a different design, but again, it separates you from motor vehicle traffic and gives you a better sense of safety, and it certainly encourages more women on bikes, and it's just a safer environment. A little bit closer to home in Athens, Georgia, they have various facilities here, as you can see. This is going toward the campus, I believe it is, but they have a contraflow bike lane here, and then they have a green bike lane going with the direction of traffic, and then they have a bike box as you approach the campus there. So again, you can have various facilities. Oops, I skipped over one. What did I do? There I went, okay. Even closer by, Georgia Tech, just a little bit north of here. It's just a short stretch, but it's on the section of the sidewalk connecting two streets with bike lanes. They have you wouldn't exactly call it a cycle track, but anyway, it's a connector between two bike lanes on adjacent streets. This is what they have at MIT. I figured, well, if I'm going to show Georgia Tech, I'll show my alma mater, MIT. So here's MIT, and they put a cycle track. And the difference is they provide over 500 bike racks for bikes on their campus, and I don't think that Georgia Tech or Georgia State has anything like 500 bike racks on your campuses, but let me know if I'm wrong. Not traffic calming, providing complete streets I think is really important. I do like taking some examples from my own home state of North Carolina. This is exactly the same street, above and below. Note the difference though. What they did is they put the street on a road diet to make it into a complete street. They put in bike lanes on both sides. They shortened the median, the crossing distance for the pedestrians, so they made it safer for the pedestrians. They made it safer for the cyclists by providing the bikeway. And just look at the overall, I mean, even from an urban design point of view, doesn't that look a lot better than that? It doesn't hurt that it's in summer and that's in winter, but at any rate, it shows you what you can do with the exact same street. One of the problems with bike lanes, they're often blocked. And in New York City, it's just an epidemic. I mean, it's like, it's a real problem. This is why that they decided to go with the cycle tracks, because you can't really block a cycle track, but you can easily with delivery trucks or illegally parked vehicles, you can block a bike lane, and so that's the reason for alternatives to bike lanes. I thought this was a neat one. Had to give a talk at Harding 3 years ago. And this is a left-hand turn arrangement for the cyclist where you have sort of a little cutout for the cyclist there in a waiting area. Then you have a special signal, turn left, and to my surprise, you have the same thing in Atlanta. So you may not be, you don't have Harvard here maybe, but you've got the same thing Harvard's got. And advanced stop lines and bike boxes I think are really important because they put the cyclist in the line of sight of the motorist. That's the most important thing. I mean, it also gets the cyclist to the intersection sooner, so that's sort of nice. And also you're not breathing in the pollution that's coming from the cars. But the most important thing is the safety improvement of this, and that is because the cyclist is directly in the line of sight of the motorist, you're less likely to be hit as a cyclist. This was the neatest thing I ever came across, and that is the green wave. In many Danish towns, they've introduced something called the green wave for cyclists, but I thought this was the best of all. This is the second or third largest city in Denmark, Odense. And you see these little green things here? Well, they do have a green wave for cyclists, and they determine, depending on the route it's used, if it's a sort of a shorter route, it's a lower average speed. If it's a long distance cycling route, it's a higher speed. But what they did on this particular route is these are pulsating lights. And as a cyclist, if you follow the wave of the pulsating light, you will always reach a green light at every intersection. Is that neat or what? Do that in Atlanta, and you'll get a lot of tourists coming to Atlanta just to see that, to see your green wave. Well, you've got lots of recreational trails, and I have actually one of my former students is in Augusta, Georgia, Jason Harden, so he took some of these photos for me. But you've got the Beltline trail here, which is getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. Lots of recreational trails all over Georgia. And I can't give this presentation without saying something from my hometown of Raleigh. We have a big recreational path system, the greenway system. It's 174 miles of greenways, and it's expanding all the time. One of our problems in Raleigh-Durham, and maybe it's also a problem here in Atlanta, and that is we have great recreational trails, but we just don't have very much in terms of getting to the recreational trails. There's on-street facilities, say, in the city of Raleigh or in the city of Durham or whatever. There's not those facilities, but great recreational facilities. Surprise, surprise, most of the cycling there is recreational. But anyway, it's a good thing. Here's a shot of Memphis. Can anyone tell me what is in that pyramid? Does anyone know?
It's becoming a Bass Pro Shop. It was an arena.
Oh, Okay, definitely. I always think of it's like the Great Pyramids or something, but anyway. I was just curious. Anyway, Kyle sent this to me, and they've basically turned this, they've vastly improved the walking and cycling facilities here along the river. Another thing nearby, and then I'll try to hurry up here, is bridges are crucial. You've really got to get across bridges in many of these cities. I mean, maybe not here in Atlanta, but in Charleston, you'll see that this, the bridge over the Ashley River in particular is a very controversial one. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but it means taking out one lane of traffic for cars or for motor vehicle traffic and devoting it to a lane for cyclists. And it's been a big controversial issue, but it is actually the most important missing link in the East Coast Greenway network. They did already provide a lane on the Ravenel Bridge. But they're still working on this missing link over the Ashley River. But again, it's a really important thing to do. In Portland, and I'll go through these quickly now, but just to, I don't want to overemphasize too much, but in cities with rivers, bridge connections are absolutely crucial. And the big boom in cycling that everyone knows about in Portland really took off once they improved the bike crossings across the Willamette River, I think 6 of them. And the same thing in New York City. Everyone's heard about the bike boom in New York City. Well, it happened when they put in bicycling paths over the Brooklyn Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge. And that's when you have all of a sudden the gentrification of Brooklyn and all those people coming by bike into Manhattan to work. But it was absolutely crucial. And again, I have to put in something here for North Carolina. It's a great bridge over I-40. It was a missing link in the East Coast Greenways network. Was on the American Tobacco Trail, and really nice facility. And you've got one here in Charlotte, here, there, in Charlotte, nearby. So anyway, they're important. Traffic calming is also very important. Because speed kills. It really does. This is from the World Health Organization. Once a car is traveling more than 30 kilometers an hour, let's just say more than 20 miles an hour, the likelihood that that car is going to kill a pedestrian in a crash goes up exponentially. And so it's not just arbitrarily that European cities have chosen 30 kilometers an hour as the speed limit for most residential areas. And by the way, when I was mentioning traffic calming earlier, in Berlin or Munich or Freiburg or in any of these, you're talking about 85 to 90% of all streets there are traffic calmed at 30 kilometers or less. This is a typical traffic calm street in Freiburg, Germany. And again, it doesn't take a whole lot. In this case, it was just putting in those 2 bollards and paint on the street. This is a very typical thing now in new German and Danish and Dutch suburbs, and that is you do away with the sidewalk, the bike lane, the travel way for the car altogether. It's a shared street. And with these sorts of shared streets, you can see there's a special sign here. And what it says is that what that sign designates is the speed limit is 7 kilometers an hour. And that it's for kids playing in the street, it's for walking in the street, biking in the street, and for cars as well. But if, as a motorist, you hit a pedestrian or a cyclist, you are in big trouble. So it really makes it like part of your front yard. That's the whole purpose of it. There we go. Bike boulevards is probably something that a lot of you have heard about. Most famously in the United States is Portland for having the bike boulevards, but there are all sorts of, basically what they are is traffic calm streets, but it's a particular corridor, a coordinated corridor of traffic calm streets, which facilitates relatively quick movement by bikes, so the fewest minimal sort of stop signs, and prevents through traffic by cars. And it's been very successful. And it doesn't cost that much. I mean, if you compare this to the cost of building something else, it's a lot less. It's less than $1 million a mile to produce these. And there's a number of ways you can do it. You'll see some of these in the photos. Something like 100 miles of bike boulevards in Vancouver. You can use things such as traffic circles, or as you'll see in the next ones, all sorts of really neat cut-throughs. Now, isn't that pretty? I mean, look at that. Doesn't that turn you on? Didn't it make it worth it coming here at 8 o'clock in the morning just to see that? Well, anyway, lots of these cut-throughs, as you can see. And what do? They're dead ends for cars. They're throughways for cyclists. So as a cyclist, you're getting a very direct route. As a car, you're having to go every which way. And so, I mean, people aren't riding their bikes just for health. They're getting there because it's faster to do it by bike. And that's the case in every Dutch and German city. Other examples of these sorts of things. So again, this is it's a dead end for cars, but it's cut through for bikes. The same thing here. The traffic circle here, another example here. And this is just another example. They have, I guess it'd be about 90 or 80 miles of bike boulevards in Portland. Artificial dead ends. These are diverters, various kinds, which have sort of the same purpose. Traffic calming islands. I'm not going to go through this because we don't have time, but I'll just say one thing, and that is the kind of a cycling facility you build depends on the kind of roadway you're dealing with. If you're talking about a road with a lot of traffic, especially a lot of heavy vehicle traffic at fairly rapid speeds and a high volume of traffic, you want maximum physical separation between the traffic and the cyclists. If you're talking about a residential street with very light volumes of traffic, with very few trucks, with very little through traffic, then you can go for something like traffic calm street with no facilities at all. You can make it into a bike boulevard. Bike transit integration is crucial. You're doing a great job here in the South, let me tell you. I looked actually at the statistics for the biggest cities throughout the South. Every single city that I looked at has 100% of their bikes with bike racks. So, and by comparison, can anyone here guess what city in the United States has 0% of its bikes with buses with bike racks? It's New York. It's the one holdout. It's ridiculous. And there's no good excuse. But anyway, 100% of big cities in the South have racks on their buses. And it's a really important thing. You can have bike racks on light rail, such as here in Charlotte. You can combine the light rail with the bike sharing system, which I also do in Charlotte. And of course, you have bike transit integration here in Atlanta on MARTA. The bikes are allowed on board the MARTA trains. You have bike racks on all your buses, and then you have, I can't remember the exact number, but you have quite a few bike racks that are actually within the stations themselves. So they're sheltered. And in most studies, maybe there's some exceptions, they tend to be safer. Bike stations is a new concept. I can't say it's that new, but it started off in Europe. There's hundreds of these currently in Europe. And this one happens to be in Münster, Germany, 3,500 bikes. Well, we're not going to get that in the United States. But this is what we have. So we have a number of them, but this is the one next to Union Station in Washington, has 150 bikes. But it's secured, it's sheltered, they can do bike repairs and so forth and so on. Another example of bike transit integration, you can see here they have a metro station, they have the bike docking station for the Bixby system, and here's a cycle track. So again, just how important it is to integrate it with transit. Bike sharing systems popping up all over the United States, over 50 now, and it just continues to increase and increase. And I can't resist pointing this out because the cyclist planner in Cambridge, Massachusetts, insisted that I do so. Kara Siderman said, did you see the poster? And I said, no. That's what it says. 1 out of 10,000 historians agree. If Napoleon had led his troops into battle on bikes, he would have won. So, have to have a little bit of humor, folks. City Bike in New York. I mean, this cover I thought was so perfect. I mean, and you people are in public health. And I mean, it's just so perfect. The irony of people spending money to go into some sweaty, smelly gym, and by comparison, for almost free, you're getting to take one of these city bikes. Oh, well, I get carried away by some of the things. Other things you can do, there are bike counters. I thought these pretty neat. They have one of these, it's not just, this happens to be in Denmark, but they have one of these on a bridge in Seattle that I went across last year. Directional signs, I think, are really important as well. I will try to, I sort of like this, air pumps. Why aren't there more air pumps around? Often I need to put more air in my tires and I think, oh. Bike corrals have been a big, big boom. And they're even in the town where I am, in New Brunswick, New Jersey, where Rutgers is located, we've installed, I think it's 3 or 4 bike corrals over the last few years. Just the last few months, not the years. And so what they found is you get, obviously, a lot more, in fact, the next slide shows it, you get like something 10 times more bikes parked in the space for 1 car. And we do need a lot of parking at universities. And if you think that the provision of parking is expensive, it's about 100 times more expensive providing a parking space for a car than it is providing a parking space for a bike. So anytime anyone at the university says, we just don't have the money in our budget to provide more bike parking, say, would you rather spend 100 times more and provide the car parking instead? Safe routes to schools has been a really important program, getting kids to school. You can try to promote a bike to school day. And this is important, again, this is in, I'm almost finished now, but in Sydney, Australia. Again, Fiona sent me this picture and said, I want you to show this picture in the United States. She put in this bicycle track. She lives in this neighborhood. And before it was put in, and you got to admit, this is a really nice cycle track. You see this complete separation from the motor vehicle traffic. Before the cycle track was put in, none of the kids biked to work, none of the kids. And she has kids who go to school in this neighborhood. After the cycle track was put in, now over 1/3 of the kids cycle to work. It just shows you how important it is, this sort of feeling of safety, and that the parents feel that there's a safe route for their school kids to get to school. And why is this important? Now I want you to really get this. This is the most important. I mean, we love our kids, right? Well, it turns out the kids who bike to work arrive at school awake, ready to learn, more attentive and able to concentrate. They advance their mental alertness. This is a study of 20,000 school children. They advance their mental alertness by half a school year, and now get this. More benefit for their mental development than having breakfast and lunch. Can you imagine? You convince parents to make walking and cycling to school safer and more convenient. And look at that. That's incredible benefits for the mental development of their kids, plus the physical activity the kids are getting as well. Of course, you need bike training. In every German and Dutch school, by the 3rd, 4th grade, you've had extensive training in traffic education, including cycling safety. First, they take you on this sort of artificial test course, and then they take you out on the road. You can have cycling training courses for adults. You can have bike to work days. You can have guided bike tours for seniors, something you often find in Europe, and something that you have here in Atlanta as well, but in many, many, many cities, even in New Brunswick. These ciclovias, or open street events, have become, in fact, Olga Sarmiento, who's a public health colleague of mine in Colombia, said, she calls it a healthy epidemic. And you can see, I mean, that's just an incredible, like an exponential increase in the number of cities in the Americas having these open street events. And, if I can get this to go, yours is called Streets Alive. How many of you have been to Streets Alive? Oh, most of you. Good for you. I've been to Summer Streets in New York. I've been to our Ciclovia in New Brunswick. I'm not sure what else. But I mean, they're great events, I think, because what they do is they show everyone that the streets are for everyone. The streets are not just for cars. And they get people then, you know, when you see everyone else on bikes having fun and walking around, it's sort of say, hey, you know, that was pretty good. I think I'm going to try that out again. And so it's been a really very successful promotional kind of event to encourage more and more cycling. The key thing, of course, is you've seen this list of policies, building better bicycle infrastructure, various kinds of bicycling promotional programs, training programs, restrictions on car use, traffic calming of residential neighborhoods, and so forth and so on. But the big question is, how do we get these things implemented? How do we get the politicians to buy into this, to say, okay, I'm going to be in favor of this, and I'm going to devote part of our budget to building protected cycle tracks, to cycling traffic education in public schools, to traffic calming residential neighborhoods, and putting the priority on people instead of cars. It's a very, I'm out of time, so I can't tell you the answer to this, but I will find out the answer because I currently have a research project with the Vova Foundation at Harvard University, which is looking at cities around the world, and specifically from a political science point of view, examining how cities have successfully managed to implement these sorts of policies that do, in fact, encourage more walking and cycling. It doesn't happen by itself. Without public policies, you're not going to get an increase in walking and cycling. You have to have explicit public support, maybe the local politician, the local political party, it may be the state political party, I think almost always requires the participation of NGOs, enlightened bureaucrats who do the planning on a day-to-day basis. All of these come together, and if you look at the cities that have been most successful, they sort of managed to put all of those ingredients together to implement these policies. And I'll just stop with that slide. I think this is what they say in New Orleans, laissez les bon temps rouler. So, en vélo, which means on bike. So let the good times roll. And I'll stop there and maybe have you ask some questions. I hope I didn't outrage you too much.
Thank you, Dr. Puker. That was, I think, excellent talk. I'm Mike Lenny, president of Panther Bikes. I think a lot of people in this room, urban planners, cycling advocates, are deeply indebted to you for the ammo with which you've provided us to do our best to start changing policy here. I think we have a lot to talk about. The rest of the afternoon, I think, is going to be pretty interactive, so we'll have some time to delve into these topics a little more. But does anyone have a couple initial thoughts or questions or anything that they would like to say right now?
Actually, we can take a couple of questions, and then we're going to continue with, obviously, the answer.
Right. I think everyone should feel free if they need to stand up, stretch their legs, go to the bathroom. I think Rebecca's going to probably take over in 10 or 15 minutes to give another presentation. But Matt?
Hi there.
Hi.
Matthew Jones. Thank you very much, Dr. Puker. So this building stands directly in front of the most controversial piece of contraflow bike lane in town that regularly has multiple jurisdictions of police officers parking upon it. As the streetcar gets going, and as your last slide was about implementation and building alliances, any suggestions for how you get multiple jurisdictions of police, planning, universities, downtown improvement district, that sort of thing, on board with educating their own and not ticking them off and turning them into enemies?
Wow. I mean, is this ever a challenge in the United States? In New York, I mean, I see it in New York especially, but the biggest violators of bike lanes in New York City are the New York City police. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so getting them on board, it's been a real challenge. You're in the same city of New York. The police department doesn't really know what DOT is doing. DOT doesn't know what Department of Health is doing. Department of Health doesn't know what the city planning department wants. And so you have these 5 or 6 conflicting departments within the same exact city, and they can't get their act together. And now, one of the things we're going to be looking at, because one of our case studies is going to be Unifying, and they do get their act together. I mean, the notion of the police not cooperating with the transportation department would be inconceivable. And what we're trying to find is, how do they do this? What are the actual mechanisms for getting that sort of cooperation and forcing it? But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we have a situation also in New Brunswick, New Jersey. It's a very dangerous intersection for cyclists. There's a bike bridge that sort of lets you right off on a really dangerous street. And what they need to do is just continue the bike bridge over the street, over to the main college campus of Rutgers. Well, there's 4 jurisdictions: Rutgers University, Middlesex County, the state of New Jersey, and the federal government, plus the Historic Preservation Department of the state of New Jersey, which there's some house nearby that would block the view of this house. It's like, you've got to negotiate with these 5 groups, and they still haven't solved the problem. I just don't understand why we can't do it. But that's gonna be the purpose, actually, of this project with the Bowler Foundation, to see how have they managed to do it. But you know, in Canadian cities, one of the ways they do it is it's all sort of within the, how can I put it, the different departments, whether it's transportation or police or land use, whatever, they're all integrated, much more integrated in land use with transportation, much more integrated than we have in the United States. So I think Canada has some examples as well, but it's taking a long time to get into the whole situation in Canada. But they do, I think, a much better job of integration. Yep.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cooper. Really valuable information there, very helpful for us planning and thinking about the future in Atlanta. One question that I have for you is, in Atlanta, most of our bike lanes are pretty narrow, including the ones that we're planning. We have cycle tracks that are maybe 10 feet wide, and I see this all over town. I'm really concerned that we're underbuilding here, that we're spending a lot of money and we're making things just a little too small. What is your concept of a good width for cycle tracks and these kinds of infrastructure? Thank you.
My answer would be, I'm not an engineer, so I don't really, I can't really tell you exact specifications. I can tell you the following. In Copenhagen, I mean, they started off with cycle tracks that were of a certain width. The volumes just got so high, they then have gradually had to widen them. And so when you put in a cycle track, that's not necessarily the end of the story. If volumes increase, then you can expand them. And that's what they had to do this because there's so much bicycling. You have a lot of bicyclists passing slower bicyclists in both directions, and you just need more space than 10 feet would give you. And so the only answer I know is in cities where that has happened, such as in Copenhagen, which is certainly a very successful city, they simply wait. When the volumes increase to that extent, they widen the cycle track. And they have, I'm trying to think, it's a little bit of a different design. I didn't show, I don't think, any cycle. Well, I told the one, the Green Wave in Odense, but they have a slightly different design to the cycle track, which makes it easier to, it's a raised curve. And so you just take that curve, move it out a little bit, a foot or 2 feet or whatever, and it's pretty easy to expand that one. I think it might be a little bit more difficult in Vancouver with those really big planners.
Thank you.
I think the answer is I think you adapt over time. I think the same thing is, and this has happened in New York City, where everyone's heard of the Broadway car-free zone. Originally started off as an experiment. And so this is a political lesson as well, because they were afraid that this is going to be really controversial, taking whatever it is, 10 blocks of Broadway and making it car-free. And so they said, well, this is just an experiment. We're going to put down some temporary bollards. Well, it was a huge success. So it's permanent, and they're expanding it. Same thing happened with car-free zones I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Here I start walking around. Now I'm really dangerous. But car-free zones, even in Europe, these are not something that were accepted immediately. No. If you look at one of the oldest ones, which is in Stockholm, Copenhagen, it was Straget, I think is what it's called. They got opposition like crazy from the businesses. They were, well, how are people going to get to our business without a car? We're going to go out of business. Well, they said, well, we'll just do it on an experimental basis. Well, what they found was the retail sales were booming where they had the car-free zone. Guess what happened? The retailers that were outside of the car-free zone demanded to be included in the car-free zone. And so the car-free zone just continued to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And this happens in city after city after city. So what we think of as being a European policy that's only going to work in Europe, they had real implementation problems and strategies and political sort of methods for getting these things implemented over time. Traffic calming. This is not something that the city came in and said, we're going to traffic calm your neighborhoods. No. This was a grassroots effort where the parents of the kids, they're saying, these cars are running over our kids. And we want the speed reduced on this street, and we're not just going to post a sign, we're going to put up diverters and all sorts of other infrastructure measures. And so almost every single one of these strategies that was adopted in European cities really was more from the grassroots up and then implemented on a wide citywide scale. And I mean, if anything, they now have another, just take 2 more minutes. They have something in German they call play zones or Spielstraßen. And this is the equivalent, the Dutch word is Wohnhof, but this is where they reduce the speed to 7 kilometers an hour or 4 miles an hour. And more and more and more of the traffic calm neighborhoods, and these are the neighbors, the residents are saying, we want a Spielstraße in our block. We're not satisfied with just a traffic calm street of 30 kilometers. We want to make our street into a Spielstraße. And now, you get in Munich, I think there's 70 or 80 of these Spielstraßen, and they're just growing and growing. Same thing with bike corrals. I mean, this time coming back to the United States, in Portland, you think, oh, well, this is going to be a fight, getting the businesses to allow to have the car parking spaces taken away and have instead bike parking. No. There's a long waiting list of businesses who are begging the city of Portland, please take out the car parking and put in bike corrals instead. And this is happening in more and more cities around the country. So I think it's really important how, I mean, the last slide that I really can't talk much about, but politically implementing this. I mean, it's a strategy. It's really talking to the politicians, involving the public, making sure you're getting the public's participation and explaining to the public. You traffic calm that street, your kids. The biggest benefit of traffic calming is reduced traffic fatalities by children in their own neighborhoods. And I think if parents knew this, I mean, if we really made it clear and showed them the evidence, they may be in favor of traffic calming as well. I mean, what's more important to you, your kids or your cars? I mean, that's how I put it, but that's pretty controversial.
And I think that's going to be the real value here today is talking about how to really kind of get over that hump of the initial kind of opposition that doesn't see the evidence that you presented to a point where the community wants these things because they're obviously improving quality of life, and that's a bigger discussion than we have right now. So why don't we take 10 minutes and
We'll get started at 10 or after 11 with Rebecca's talk. Okay. So restrooms are here. We still have a little food. Lunch will be immediately following Rebecca's talk. So once again, thank you.
Thank you very much.